I think today is going to be quite familiar from things that we did in the last unit. Yesterday we talked about rates of change, what do they represent, that sort of thing, starting to look at applications. But we're not going to worry too much about what the rate of change represents today. It may come up a little bit, but what we're looking at today is really same, very similar to what we did in the last unit, something we did in the last unit, but this time instead of just a T and an N, although this was total number of blocks and figure number for us at one point, or instead of just Y and X, now they actually represent something, okay? And if when we're doing an equation, a formula, or the rule, yeah, we're going to use variables to represent these. So I might use H for hours, and I might use E for earnings, okay? But they actually represent something in the real world. So let's take a look. But this is the same as what we did before with tables. And look at the questions are the same. How much for 0 hours and how much per hour? Or in other words, what is the change? And I know that because of the word per. So whenever I see the word per, that's asking for the change. So I'm going to look at this and I'm going to see this is an increase of $10 in 1 hour. This is an increase of $10 in 1 hour. This is another increase of $10 in 1 hour. So I'm going up 10 every hour. Now we remember I want to track backwards. I'm going to use a different color. I'm going to use orange. Track backwards. If I'm adding 10 going this way, I subtract 10 going that way. If I'm adding 1 going this way, I'm going to subtract 1 going that way. And 10 minus 10 is 0. 1 minus 1 is 0. So that's $0 in 0 hours. $10 in 1 hour, $20 in 2 hours, $30 in 3 hours, $40 in 4 hours. And we can see how much for 0 hours is $0. How much per hour? $10 in 1 hour. Yes, that's this. Or $20 in 2 hours, which is this. But it's most importantly, it's this divided by that. That's what I'm actually looking at. It's what is the change for each of these changes, which is $10 per hour. So what is the rule? Remember, to make up the rule, to make up a linear relation, there's the two things, how much for 0, or in other words, where does it start? And what is the change? And so my total amount of earnings will be where it starts. So I could say 0 plus $10 per hour. So I chose H as my variable. I could have chosen X. I could have chosen N. I could choose whatever. I could choose T for time. I chose H for hours. And we don't need the 0, so I'm going to get rid of it. So it's like 10H plus 0. Remember, we can write it one way or the other. It doesn't matter. What we can't do is E equals 0H plus 10. The H has to be on the amount that's the change, okay? But it doesn't matter if it comes first or second. It just matters that the 10 and the H go together. So the simplest way is E equals 10H. Notice that I made this capital. That's often we do that. The thing on the side by itself, we make a capital, and the one on the other side we make small. You're not definitely going to lose marks if you don't do it that way. How much for 4 hours? Well, we're going to look at a couple of different ways. We already can see that from the table. We've got a graph here, so I'm also going to graph it. Okay, so I start at 0. And in the first hour, I earned $10. Second hour, 10 more dollars. Third hour, 10 more dollars. Fourth hour, 10 more dollars. Fifth hour, 10 more dollars. Okay. And There you go. And so I can answer this question by finding 4 and seeing how much it is. So how much for $4? For 4 hours? $40. And that was from the graph. I can get $40 in 4 hours from the table. But I can also use the rule, and the rule is important because if it's not on the graph or if it's not in the table, if it goes too far, or if it's just not one of the values that's in there, the rule will always work. So E equals 10 times 4 for 4 hours. 10 times 4 is 40, and that gives me the same answer. Okay, $40. So all 3 ways, sometimes I can use the table, sometimes I can use the graph. The rule will always work. So it's a good one to know how to use as well. Let's do one more here. So first I'm going to look at the table to figure out what the change is that's happening. And this looks like from 25 to 35. If I couldn't do that in my head, because this one you might be able to figure out what it's counting by, but definitely the numbers could not be as friendly and you can't figure that out. So I'm going to go 35 minus 25. Whoops, divided by 35 minus 25 is 10. So I went up 10. Now notice I didn't do 25 minus 35. I can see that this is increasing as I'm going down. It's getting bigger. So that means I'm adding. Okay. If I did 25 minus 35 and got negative 10, I would just say to myself, well, wait a minute, it's not getting smaller, it's getting bigger, so it must be positive 10. I just did it backwards. It should be 35 minus 25. Sometimes it is negative. Don't forget that. I'm not saying it's always positive. I'm just saying in this case it is. From 35 to 45, again, is up 10. 45 to 55 is up 10. In this case, each one of these is also just for 1 hour because I just went up 1 hour and 1 hour and 1 hour, but it doesn't always have to be, okay? So keep that in mind. That's going to change. If I'm going up by 10, then I'm going to go down 10. And if I'm going up by 1, then I'm going to go down 1. And that is going to give me 0. And that is going to give me 15. 25 minus 10 is 15. So again, if I want to find how much for 0 hours, well, I can do that. This is hours and earnings again, earnings per hour. So $15 for 0. How much per hour? Well, take a look. 25 divided by 1 would be 25. 35 divided by 2 is 17.5. 45 divided by 3 is 15. 55 divided by 4 is going to be something else entirely, and they're giving me different answers. But that's because there is a starting amount that's not 0. So to find how much per hour, I have to do this divided by this. So it's 10 divided by 1, which is $10 per hour. Okay, and that's how we're going to find our rate from a table. I just want to say that one more time. If I look at these, okay, $25 after 1 hour does not mean $25 per hour. I start at 15 and I get $10 each hour, $10 per hour. That's the pattern. That's why we have to know how much we start and then figure out what the rate is from there. So what is the rule? E equals 15, because that's where we start, plus 10 times the number of hours. Okay? And again, I just want to show you, oops, I'm not going to hide the table. 15 plus 10 times 3, so I'm doing 3 hours here, is 45. 15 plus 10 times 2, I'm doing 2 hours here, is 35. See, it works for all of them. How much for 4 hours? The total earnings is 15 plus 10 times 4, which is 15 plus 40, which is 55, which we already knew because it was in the table there. So this one doesn't start at 0, it starts at 15. And every time I go over 1, I'm going up $10. Up $10, up $10, up $10, and so on. Oops. Okay, and again, I like to do my line all the way through past the edge of the grid, not just stopping at the last dot that I drew. And I could get the answer to my question from the graph, but I don't know why I would do that because I've got it in the table, or finding it from the equation. The rule is is a really good thing that you need to be able to do eventually, and it's a good skill to practice now, even if you could get it from the table. Okay, so we've really started comparing tables to the rule, the equation, to the graph. We've seen this before. What we're just looking at how it represents something now today. That's the only difference between this and what we did in the last unit. Tomorrow we're going to do more of the same, but it's not always going to go up by 1. So we're going to start to see what that looks like. Okay, but hopefully this is familiar. Again, we're thinking about what the rate of change represents. And we're thinking about how this is an application in the real world and sort of slowly getting our feet wet with that, but doing some of the same skills. And I told you that for linear relations, it always comes down to where does it start and what is the change. And you can already see that even though I'm talking about hourly earnings, the hourly wage, and somebody who makes $10 an hour but started at $15 to begin with, a fixed amount, is a linear relations. It makes a straight line, but it still all means the same thing. Okay, so keep that in mind while you're working through this, that it still comes down to those two most important things. Where does it start and what is the change?